Well, hello. It's the weekend. I'm recording this on Saturday, the 5th of April. I thought I'd do a little news review because there's so much going on. I want to kind of clock it all. And I was thinking about how I used to do this when I was doing my A levels all those decades ago, 3 decades ago, and how it's such a different world studying. Back then, no internet. If you want the news, you want to read an article in a newspaper, you have to go out and buy a newspaper. That's what I've gone and done. I bought an actual physical newspaper. Have you ever seen one of these? And of course, the news is dominated by the tariffs and Trump issue. I'm not going to read every article in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to explain how I would go about it if I was still studying my A-level government and politics. And the way I would approach it now, and I'm not sure I did this perfectly way back, but I think it's important to really get to grips with understanding why you're looking at the news. So many students I tutor tell me in the early stages of me tutoring them that they have an alert on their phone that tells them when a story breaks. They get the BBC telling them, and they don't necessarily read the stories. They just get the news updates. They might sometimes read a story, and maybe not. And the BBC is good for facts because they're broadly balanced. They have to be legally, um, but they lack opinion, overt political opinion, and that's where newspapers come into their own. I don't think it's enough to simply know what's going on in politics. You have to dig deeper than that. And when you dig deeper, you see how things work in practice rather than simply in theory. What you learn from the specification is the theory and a smattering of examples. What you learn by reading newspaper articles is how people are using the system to their own advantage. It puts flesh on the bones of the specification. And therefore, you have to decide to read things. And you have to have a strategy for that. It's never too late as well, I should say this, because we're heading towards exams. And even now, you could gain something. If you're approaching your exams in a few weeks' time, you could get some benefit from simply buying a newspaper or looking online and reading articles. I'm going to go through this newspaper and show you what I mean by that and show you how I would go about this. There's no point in reading everything. There's no point in necessarily reading an entire article, even. You have to make a judgment. We're so used to reading things, when we read for pleasure, we read something from beginning to end. We don't need to do that when we're reading for research, when we're doing wider reading for our studies. Some things could be beneficial reading start to finish, but a lot of things won't be. So you have to make a choice. And first of all, you have to make a choice about whether the information in an article is simply interesting or if it's useful. And a lot of the stuff about the tariffs that Trump is doing, if you're studying either US or global politics, I think it's interesting, but not necessarily useful because there's so much of it right now. It's a general big story. Some of it might be more useful than other things, and you have to make a judgment call. So I'm going to kind of go past a lot of that unless I find things of use. So there's a general news story about China kind of hitting back. It says China hits back at Trump tariffs as markets plunge. That's the story on the front of The Guardian today. And then if I zip through the adverts, find what else is happening, see if there's anything coming on here which has political implications. Plans for national force to take over terrorism policing. So that looks like it's a don't know anything about this at all. I'm guessing that might be a cost-cutting measure, but I'm not going to read it now. I don't think it's something that I need for my studies, but there was obviously a political dimension to that. That will be something that the Home Office is doing. And then what else have we got? So we've got news of Prince Andrew writing birthday letters to Xi Jinping. And so that is going on. Again, not really something that I think is too important. Got the local elections coming up. Shire County elections are coming up, but there's a big story in Birmingham, which I don't think has elections coming up, about bin collection strikes, which is something that could be a tricky thing for the government. The Conservatives have already mentioned that this is a problem, but exactly how that is going to progress is difficult to say. So far, I'm not getting very good articles in here, and this reminds me of what it was like when I was studying. All of this has been interesting, though. None of this is dull stuff. It's just that it is stuff that I would read because I'm interested in it, rather than that I think it's going to be useful for my studies. World leaders and central banks struggle to respond to Liberation Day. Liberation Day in inverted commas. I probably would read that if I was doing global politics. I think that could be useful. Radical, risky. The week Trump rocked the global economy. Again, that could be quite useful because it's a little bit more opinionated, which is quite nice. And then we've got this story about Trump tariffs mark beginning of New World era, warns Downing Street. Well, I would read that just to get an idea about British foreign policy and where this is heading. But so far, I'm not necessarily picking out things that I think would be examples necessarily, but I think that is useful to know what is going on. And then there's more stuff about the Trump stuff. There is something about the African garment trade, which might be useful for global stuff. And again, this is all related to the trade war. Oh, here's something interesting. So there is a profile of Shabana Mahmood, who is the Lord Chancellor and Minister of Justice. Lord Chancellor with political nous, unafraid to shake up system. That's useful. It's quite nice to read an article about a particular cabinet minister and what they want to do with the brief that they have been given by the Prime Minister. So that would be something that I would look at. I might not read the whole thing. I just want to know how she's going to shake up the system. In what way is she unafraid to shake up the system? I don't know much about her. I know that she's against the idea of assisted dying, which I think could be a problem for Keir Starmer at some point. But yeah, that would be an interesting article, because a lot of these cabinet ministers, they kind of live in the shadows of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor particularly. And of course, occasionally you'll get big stories about health or the Home Office or whatever. But to get an actual profile of somebody, nearly a full page, is really interesting. And then there's something on the local elections. Reform fields at least 60 ex-Tory candidates. Yeah, I'm reading that. I'll read that later. So the idea that Reform is picking up not just votes, but they're picking up candidates from the Tories. These local elections are going to be fascinating on the 1st of May. Once the results start coming in, I think what we're going to see is, and this very much depends on the turnout, I think what we're going to see is Reform making massive gains, and the Liberal Democrats as well doing well, and the Conservatives potentially losing control of councils, not necessarily meaning that somebody else takes over the council, because it's a little bit like a hung parliament sometimes. These councils, they go into what we call no overall control. I think there's going to be a lot of that. I have the feeling that the turnout, because turnout is always low, it comes down to who can get their vote out. And I have a feeling that Reform, if somebody wants to vote Reform, they have a reason to get out there and vote for their protest vote. If you're a Conservative supporter, I'm not sure the Conservatives have given you much yet to get out there. Because they are rural counties, a lot of these councils, I'm not expecting Labour to do very well. And also some of them are in good Liberal Democrat territory in the southwest. So there are opportunities for protest votes going to the Liberal Democrats too. But this idea that 60 ex-Tory candidates are also helping Reform or standing for Reform is brilliant. And here's Russell making a slight appearance. Hello boy, how are you doing? You all right? He's had a traumatic time. Yesterday was Vets Day, and so he had to be bundled into a cat carrier. As if you've watched my previous video about him, I basically rescued him on Monday, got him to the vet, and we had a follow-up appointment yesterday, and it was traumatic. He did not take well to going in the cat carrier again. He also did not take well to the fact that I bribed him in there with treats. So now he's got used to basically spending an awful lot of time in the kitchen demanding meat, like literally just waiting there until he gets properly fed. But he found it very, very traumatic in the cat carrier yesterday, scrabbling around nearly all the way to the vets. So much so that he had a slight cut on his nose, which was a bit upsetting. But he's recovering well now, and he's sleeping next to me, so maybe I've been forgiven. And Wednesday we've got to go back, where he's going to be neutered. We don't know how old he is, but a neighbour says he's been around since 2011. So if he's that old, he's 14, and he's still totally intact. I don't know, trauma after trauma, basically. So he's going to have a general anaesthetic. That is going to be done. He's going to have a microchip, so he's owned by me. Hungry mouth to feed. Anyway, he's lovely. So there we go. So yes, these local elections I think are going to be fascinating. I mean, I love elections, so I'm going to be very excited to see those results. And I think the Conservatives are going to do really badly, unless they can convince their vote to come out. And of course, another thing to mention is that Reform are dipping in the polls. So there's a chance that, all things being equal, Reform is falling in popularity. I don't think so, but we'll see. I think their supporters are much more likely to get out and vote, personally. Russian BBC staff fear for loved ones after being labelled foreign agents. Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? The world is changing, and it's becoming a more closed place. And as these issues like Ukraine and Trump carry on, and Gaza, we are going to see different places in the world become closed off to us. There's already lots of people who will not want to go to America while Trump is in control. So that is important. But I don't think I need to read about BBC staff in Russia just yet. I don't think I'm going to get much joy out of that or much for my exam. There's that issue of the anti-abortion activist guilty of breaching clinic buffer zones. This is interesting about protest and the acceptable boundaries of protest, which has been in the news quite a lot over the last few years. We've had things like Just Stop Oil and the blocking of roads as an issue. And here we've got someone who has been found guilty of breaching a clinic buffer zone, an abortion clinic buffer zone. The buffer zones are set up to stop people from being intimidated. And she held a placard saying, "Here to talk if you want." I suppose it depends how you talk to people, but the buffer zones have been created to ensure that people can go about having an abortion without pressure. So there's a debate as to where you draw the line, how far should you limit free speech. And this has got a US dimension to it because J.D. Vance, Vice President, has criticised the UK for this decision. So that is quite interesting, and I would read that just to update myself on where we are with protest. Emails reveal peer's role in asking minister to Lord's commercial event. What's this about then? New documents reveal the extent of a Labour peer's involvement in organising the attendance of a minister at a commercial event in Parliament. So what is this about lobbying? What is it about? Emails show David Evans contacted officials working closely with Sharon Taylor, a housing minister, in the House of Lords, who was to be a keynote speaker at an event on housing that Lord Evans of Watford was hosting in Parliament. Cash for access. So he's under investigation for cash for access business. So, yeah, okay. So that is interesting. In every sphere of our politics, in every area of our politics, you find that the richest people in society find it easy to have the most access. And if you've got someone in the House of Lords who can get you access to a minister, brilliant, fantastic. Except it's not, is it? It's corrupt. So it says rules ban peers from exploiting their Lords membership. So that's what this is about, whether he exploited his membership of the House of Lords. I'm not going to say either way. So there we go. And then in the middle of this, there's a whole section called The Journal on a Saturday, which goes into more detail about politics. I mean, you could spend the weekend reading this. You could spend the week reading this. Some of it is useful, some of it not. And some of it is really good opinion stuff. There's an article here by Margaret Hodge MP. Here's what smashed the BNP in London, a playbook that said connect. So this is an article that I've seen posted online by people about how Labour helped create networks that smashed the British National Party, the fascist party in Britain that was gaining success a couple of decades ago. Her article is, we know she's a Labour MP, so she's going to big up the Labour's position on it. There was a lot more going on than just Labour involved in getting rid of the BNP. But also, it's worth noting that the BNP supporters haven't gone away. These far-right supporters won't have gone away completely. I think a lot of them will be voting UKIP or Reform, because the far right has found a place with Nigel Farage. And that's not to say that Nigel Farage deserves them, although some people will say he does. But I don't think it's fair to just simply say, well, the BNP was smashed, brilliant. These ideas carry on. I can look at sport for leisure later, so I'll get rid of that. section. Oh, sorry, sorry, that woke you up, didn't it? Poor Russell. Poor Russell. Probably wonders what on earth I'm doing, meowing next to him incessantly. Meow. Obituaries we don't need. Sorry, obituary people. Is Bond sexist? Yes, I think so. Having read all of the Ian Fleming novels and watched all of the films, I think we can definitely say that. And then we've got a world section, so this could be useful for people doing global. So there's that issue at the moment in Gaza where Israel is attacking paramedics, which is surely a war crime, is it not? Are we allowed to say that? Or is that terrible of us to suggest that killing medical staff is an awful thing to do? Ah, dear. Good grief. What's the state of the world? And that looks like it might be about it. So there's a lot of world news that is kind of interesting and gives a good background, but a lot of it is not really stuff I would want to read about. This is something I would read about again, because this is about protest, and this is about Just Stop Oil, because Just Stop Oil have announced that they're not going to be doing high profile protests anymore. They're not going to be trying to get themselves arrested. So that's interesting. And what does that mean? Does that mean that they've failed? I personally think that they missed the point about protest. Protest is not. I've done a lot of protesting in my time, and the last thing you do is annoy the people you want on your side, and they need the public on their side. So why did they go around annoying the public? Why don't they? Why if you're trying to stop oil, why don't you protest the oil companies? Why don't you protest the petrol stations, or whatever it is? You need to do it in a way that doesn't annoy the public. Actually, protesting the petrol stations might annoy people who are trying to fill their cars, might it? But that's the mistake they made. They could have had the public on their side if they'd approached it in a different way. But what is also frustrating about what's happened with them is that their approach really was attacked by the previous Conservative government in such a way that it's made protest incredibly hard for everybody else. And it has also meant that there are people in prison now for peaceful protests, and we've never really had that. Peaceful protesters have long been kind of saved from long jail sentences in this country, and now we don't have that. And anyone worried about Trumpism coming to this country should be worried about the protest laws we currently have, I think. So that sort of thing is interesting and useful, I would say, in terms of understanding how protest works and understanding how pressure groups can either get their own way and get things done, or sometimes retreat. I get the feeling they're retreating, but I'll need to read the article to find out for sure. But there's an awful lot going on right now, isn't there? So, thinking about Trump and the tariffs, thinking about protests, thinking about local elections coming up, and so on and so forth. That's just me flicking through the pages of a newspaper. How many? 50 odd pages of a newspaper, just selecting the things that I think are useful for me to read in more detail in the last week or so. The newspapers at a weekend are particularly useful because they try to recap on everything that's happened in the previous week. So they're very good on a Sunday, but I bought that one today on a Saturday. And to be honest, it could last me several days. That I don't need to get one every day. The other thing to mention, of course, is it's just one newspaper, and nowadays with the internet, you have the ability to access the world's newspapers at a touch of a button. I would recommend getting stuck into them. Reading articles like that gives you a much better understanding of politics, even if you're weeks away from your exams. Reading that profile about Shabana Mahmood, for example, will give you some understanding of what it's like to be a cabinet minister and what a cabinet minister might try to achieve. So you're learning stuff about PM and cabinet that you perhaps wouldn't get from the specification, an actual real human being in that position. Observing the local elections that are coming up and evaluating the results tells you something about the state of our political parties right now. There's going to be fireworks if Reform do so well. We will have to see how the Tories react to that. Does it push them towards a merger with Reform? We've seen councillors move to Reform from the Tories. We've seen Reform picking up former Tory candidates. Is that going to happen to MPs? Are there going to be more defections crossing the floor of the House from the Tories to Reform? Anything could happen. So it's going to be a really interesting period right before the exams. And if you're in your first year of A-levels, then you don't need to worry about that just yet, do you? So that's great. Okay, right. So that's me going through a newspaper, just picking out the stories that I think I want to read in detail. I'm not going to read it all. You don't need to read it all. You don't want to just read the headlines either. You want to pick out the bits that you think are useful for your studies. Go for it. Give it a go. Buy an actual physical newspaper. Something nice about the tangible nature of opening real pages and not just staring at a screen. It's quite nice. Right, happy studying. I'll be back another time. Right now, I'm going to stroke this sleeping pussycat. Okay, all right. Bye-bye.